Why can't I hear? What? Why can't I hear? Why? Why?
So today I want to talk about this amazing train wreck of a game that is The Quiet Man. Like most people, I find a certain epicuricacy in finding bad media and determining the ways that something like that can be developed by professionals can be botched to such weird and unique extents. But very rarely do I come across something that I actually want to talk about it for 30 minutes on end, or however long this is going to take. This might take an hour. The Quiet Man is kind of the special disaster of the game that honestly, the more that I think about it, the more hilarious it becomes. Not because of the experience itself, but for all the questions that it raises, mostly coming down to what were they even thinking? Like honestly, while I don't actually recommend you play the game for yourself because it is a slog to get through, the actual experience that I've had in dissecting this game is just so wonderful that I've decided to make a condensed, actually palatable version of the Quiet Man experience for you. It's kind of magically transcendental in the fact that the experience of unpacking this beast is far more entertaining than anything in the actual gameplay. It's a complete train wreck, and I love it. So come with me on this magical journey into, I don't know, failure? Alright, sorry for the camera change. This is mounted on a really bad tripod. I don't actually have a mount for anything. As you can probably tell, this is kind of cheap. So to those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, The Quiet Man is a 2018 video game published by Square Enix, developed in part with Studios. It was first announced at E3 earlier in the year at Square Enix's panel, which was like this brief 1.5-minute teaser of this live-action FMV that transitioned into like a quiet brawler. And it didn't really tell us a whole lot, like not even an actual developer. But basically the pitch of the game is you play as a deaf protagonist. I wasn't really sure what to make of this, and I don't think really anybody did. And the fact that basically nothing about it was said following its announcement added a lot of mystery to it. For a while afterwards, I was actually keeping track of this game for a bit because I kept wondering, where would they be taking this? I tend to keep my expectations about media kind of low because in general, I'm just not a very hyped person. But more specifically for stuff like this, it's also because I pretty much took this as being some kind of low-key experimental indie game thing.
It's a game done with a big company like, you know, Square Enix, and yet it's an independent vibe. I mean, it's really an indie game.
You know, it's not trying to be some kind of big AAA blockbuster, even though it's being published by Square Enix. This is like the humbler game. This is like the B-side of the high production values, focusing on a briefer but hopefully still worthwhile experience, which was then exacerbated when I heard that the game was advertised as you can complete this game in one sitting, which is kind of a weird thing to advertise, but I was still pretty interested in seeing where this game was going to be going. Because honestly, the idea of like a brawler or like some kind of narrative-driven game without sound, that's not a bad idea. That actually sounds like it has the potential to be a really creative and interesting twist, at least depending on how you implement it. I wasn't sure how they were going to implement it, but another thing the game was advertised was that it was going to seamlessly blend high production, live action, and CG together. And it's Square Enix, so if there's anything that can be unanimously said positive about them, it's high production value. So I was assuming there was going to be a lot of visual storytelling to carry the experience. And then it just kind of blipped off the radar for a while, and then it just appeared. Like sometime around November, I was like, wait, The Quiet Man is already on Steam? Like, I heard no hype about it before the game was released, and that was kind of a bad sign, or possibly a good sign, because The Quiet Man is, it's bad. It's bad. Okay, so to go down the list of problems, let's start from the top. The biggest thing that people complain about this game is the fact that it really did commit to its pitch of a soundless video game, and it did it in the absolute weirdest and most backwards way possible. The game is heavily narrative driven, but the narrative is not visually focused. In one of the most baffling design choices I've ever seen for a professionally released game, the game is 90% silent, but almost all of its story is weirdly dialogue focused, and there are no subtitles. Many of the scenes feature basically nothing visually significant except lip movements for minutes at a time, where what's being said is the focus of the scene, but is paradoxically made inaudible, making the game fundamentally incomprehensible. Like, this is already a bad decision, but to make things worse is that the muting and incomprehensibility, it's not even supposed to be some kind of diegetic reaction. The audience doesn't get to understand what happens in these conversations, but our deaf protagonist here, whose name is Dane, by the way, he can. There are many instances where he has actual two-way conversations with other people and even speaks audibly, but even though this is assumedly our POV, not only can we not understand what he can understand, we can't even tell what our character is saying. There are also scenes using American Sign Language, which he should logically be able to understand, but it also remains unsubtitled for the audience. There is an option to turn the subtitles on, but they literally only apply for two scenes, the very beginning and the very end, the latter of which is just the song for a non-diegetic end credit sequence, and the former already has sound on, and it gives us gems like this.
What the hell, man? You stupid or very stupid?
And the subtitles they do provide are these really ugly plain white text that don't even have outlines, which just honestly makes the options really feel like even more of an afterthought. There is an in-game disclaimer that claims subtitles will only appear when spoken dialogue is intended to be heard or understood. For narrative purposes, no subtitles will be displayed for most scenes regardless of the setting. Was the narrative purpose of this decision to turn your game into an Ouroboros?
There are things that he knows that as a player you don't know. There's a level of excitement trying to go into this universe and not understand what people are saying, but trying to put, puzzle it together yourself.
As anyone who's seen a silent film can attest, there's like a certain presentation required to make a silent narrative convey info, mostly through like the visual performance and editing. But here, the general editing is just way too clunky to be comprehensible. And the acting is, for the most part, too dry and stiff to communicate any concepts either. And the concepts that we can parse are, yeah. It's a story built around communication beyond words. Like, that's the tagline for this entire game. Which, like, again, as a concept, that has a lot of potential. But then it, like, caps itself in the leg at communicating because that's helpful. You don't need dialogue in order to get us understanding and invested in your story, but you do need other things. Oh, but here's the worst part. There actually is an option to turn on sound. When you beat the game for the first time, there's a post-credit stinger where it like rewinds to like a few critical scenes in the plot with the sound on, which frames them in a new context as they reveal some interesting, sorta, twists in the plot. This is a teaser for The Quiet Man Answered, which is like a second playthrough where basically everything is identical. The only difference is that it just adds the sound back into the narrative. And weirdly, this is marked as DLC, like free DLC, but it was only released a week after the game came out. Which, like, okay, one, this basically means that you have to play the game a second time just in order to understand why you played the game the first time. Two, this basically comes across as like a pretty clear admission of failure, where they acknowledge that they realized the game was incomprehensible in its initial presentation, but then rather than attempt to actually fix anything, like in the storytelling through like, I don't know, reshoots or something to preserve any artistic intent they might have had, they just released the audio and then called it a day. And three, while the lack of sound in the muted version ruins everything and makes a really bad experience, the sound on version somehow manages to make things worse and also so much better.
Fuck you looking at, huh, little bitch?
I'm going to keep her safe.
Whoa! God damn!
Jesus, that's a fucked up kid.
Why can't I hear? Why?
I have a feeling that while they were initially recording everything, the actors went in with their scripts under the assumption that everything would be 100% silent the entire way through, and that the final product would be assembled in a way that they didn't have to care about their line deliveries or the sound quality, or at least as far as to make the story make sense. But then partway in development, after everything was filmed, the creators realized they just didn't have the budget, the time, or talent, or some combination of the three to make the story comprehensible, and were like, oh, we messed up. So they decided to add back in like a half-assed sound version as a way of like cutting their losses. And maybe even improvise dressing it up as DLC to make it sort of like a sequel that reveals everything, even though all it serves is to explain a game that anyone viewing it would have already played through in its entirety. That's the only explanation I can think of for why this version feels both vital, but also like an afterthought, like haphazardly assembled to fix what they had, but like it doesn't, and arguably just makes things even worse. Not just because the performances are funny, but man, to be honest, I don't think any mid-production script rewrites or reshoots would have fixed this script. I'm honestly having a hard time deciding which is the worst option for these games' creators. Leaving the story an incomprehensible mess and then forcing viewers to decipher this mess all on their own, or explaining everything as originally written and then letting everyone realize that the script was not only conceived, but also made it past several stages in development without anybody going, okay, I need you to say that again, but slower this time. It really is the worst of both worlds here. But thankfully for me as a viewer, I'm actually very glad they decided to explain this thing, because the plot is, it's amazing. Which brings me to... Alright, this is gonna be a long one, so we better get a drink. I just moved to Los Angeles like a month ago, and I really miss Tim Hortons. I was thinking about how I wanted to approach this because given how incomprehensible the first playthrough is, I thought it made more sense to approach it the Wikipedia route and explain the actual events in chronological order with like concrete names and motivations and stuff. While I was going through several playthroughs of this game just for my general note-taking, I realized that like a big problem with the story is that it already assumes that you know what's happening the moment you first play it. Like once you actually understand what's actually going on, you can better spot the moments where they were trying to be set up and foreshadowing, but in your first playthrough it just came across as what? That's not an excuse for the bad storytelling. It basically just means that you have to go through the game at least twice just to even comprehend or potentially enjoy it. And the first playthrough is just a wasteland of confusion. However, I'm here to relate the experience of going through this whole turkey for the first time, because like I said, the more you experience this train wreck, the more amazing it gets. So, let's start off with what the sound off version sounds like. It sounds silent, basically. So the game starts off with some audio where we're introduced to Dane walking through the streets of New York, who heads to this halal stand where the guy tells us,
"The savages are out tonight, kid. Be careful."
At first I assumed this guy was supposed to be some sort of informant friend, but this is literally the only time he's ever mentioned at all. After this, Dane heads over to a gang den where we get a seamless transition into the combat, and then we start kicking the crap out of these guys. And then during this, we get a sudden flashback scene to a kid crying over a dead body, and a guy shouting at him with a gun, and then the flashback just ends. That sort of thing happens a lot, so strap in. So after beating them up and recovering a briefcase, he arrives to this place called the Club Moonside, where Dane establishes his personality by walking up to one of the guys and stealing his handkerchief to clean his blood. This man bun looking dude, whose name is B-Money, yes, really, that's what Wikipedia says, actually appears several times basically for you to pick on. I assume that this is to establish that Dane's supposed to be what the writer thinks is like a cool guy, but we don't really see any reason for why we should look down upon this guy in particular, so Dane's just kind of rude. You also see Dane looking at this picture of a lady, and then suddenly you get this flashback of said lady playing piano. There's this lingering implication that Dane knows this person and is sad because he can't hear her, but there's also this lingering question of, wait, so is this supposed to be his sister or girlfriend or mom? And I want you to keep that question in mind because trust me, this is gonna come back in the worst way possible. So let's just put a pin in that for now. I'm just gonna use like a post-it note, you know? Pin 1. Following this is a long exposition scene, of which, again, is mostly comprised of silent lip reading, which introduces this guy, who receives the retrieved briefcase of what is revealed to be drugs. He talks on his phone and then gestures a lot, and then flashback time! This time it shows that guy, I think, fighting over another guy who's making fun of him with sneakers, and then somehow they fight over a gun. Young Dane and his faceless mom walk by, and you can probably guess where this is going. Don't worry, the game assumes that you don't and will be sure to clarify, which is better, I guess. Flashback ends, more silent dialogue, and then the guy pulls Dane over to show us this ransom letter. The game doesn't pause to let you actually read it in full, but two things of note. This bird-shaped wax seal because it's foreshadowing, and this bit of "I hear you with my blood" because it's very silly. Following that, Dane heads back into the back room of this place, finds this doll, which I'm almost certain doesn't actually appear later in the plot at all, and photos of the guy with a lady who turns out to be piano player lady. Flashback time. This time it's just footage of a piano player, and now you see her face. Way too much of her face. Anyways, Dane is suddenly plopped into a subway, and like for some reason you get into a fight with some thugs in green. Like, I don't know why, I don't know. During which we get another flashback, this time showing child Dane getting abused by someone we assume is his dad, because lovely. Flashback ends, we beat up more guys in gameplay, and then you just leave. And then you beat up more guys, but this time in FMV, which then suddenly introduces us to this Bruce Willis looking dude who says nothing, and then the game cuts away. Moving along, Dane arrives at the house of this lady having a minute-long audible phone call, which is pretty much just a testament to the bad storytelling of this game. Like, even if we could understand what Dane himself could understand, this phone conversation is happening at a distance even a person with intact hearing couldn't understand. So this minute-long glide is just like, why? This is one of those scenes that makes more sense in the second playthrough, where we can hear it and then it builds on a twist that we can actually understand, but this isn't the second playthrough, so it's just there. So then Dane's friend comes to pick her up in a limo, and it turns out it's Piano Lady.
Oh, what the fuck?
Meanwhile, Dane finds a mysterious dead bird hung around a tree, and then he presents it to Boss Man like he's a cat presenting a gift to his master, and appropriately he responds with, "Yeah, please take that away from me." For whatever reason, Dane comes along, and then we get like a 1.5 minute long lip reading session between Dane and Piano Lady in the car, where there's this suspicious near handhold. Again, please hold on to that. And then we arrive back to the Club Moonside, where she's playing piano and singing. I'll talk about this later because this is actually one of the game's few legitimately interesting storytelling scenes, but is interrupted by the arrival of a flashback. This time, Child Dane is crying over the body of his dead mom, who was also a piano lady. If red flags of confusion are already setting off for you, don't worry. The game will be sure to clarify it for you over and over, and it gets so much worse you wouldn't believe. But for reals, things take a turn with the arrival of a Birdman. Woo-hoo-hoo. I'm just gonna spoil it. This guy is actually supposed to be the quiet man of the title and not Dane himself, but I'm gonna call him the Birdman from now on because it's funnier. Also, out of nowhere, the gang from before just breaks in and starts a ruckus, and during which Birdman just nonchalantly walks up to Piano Lady and kidnaps her. Right? So after you fight the gang members, you go outside to fight Birdman, who's armed with the stun baton, but weirdly, even though you actually have to fight him here, only when you actually win does he then kick Dane's ass and then runs off, because simply losing the fight would ruin the script. Also, the fight scene ends with this. I don't know, I just like that Birdman's like, "You seriously grabbed it?" Getting his ass kicked somehow triggers another flashback that clarifies that Dane's mom indeed got shot in a scuffle between two guys, which, as I want to remind, was over a pair of sneakers. So Dane gets back up and gives Birdman chase as he drives off. He runs into more gang members that you then have to beat up. This happens. Birdman appears and does this weird, spooky vanishing thing, and then Dane gets bonked in the head, prompting yet another flashback with dead Piano Mom, where this happens. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, he gets rescued by some other men in black who scare the thugs off, one of which is that hipster-looking dude. Dane gets back up with evidently non-existent head trauma, talks with Hipster Man again, and then blows him off with gang signs, or sign language or something, and then leaves. Also, he punches his car window, because tough guy, I guess. So then right after this, apropos of nothing, Dane just finds another den of gang members, and then he just beats people up there too. And then he just leaves, where he then runs into that old detective guy who is asking some other dude about Piano Mom Lady. Yeah. This prompts Dane to do a Pledge of Allegiance, and then another flashback to the scene where his mom was shot, where the detective is with him. I'll just spoil this. This dude is supposed to be his dad, whose name is Robert. You will also note the way that he is speaking to Dane, a supposedly deaf kid. Put another pin in it. Yay. Anyways, more aimless venturing into random buildings where I swear I didn't cut any important context out. Dane just wanders into and discovers Birdman's den, which is filled with images of Piano Lady with like 1,000 lit candles. And then suddenly Birdman appears out of nowhere and you also have to fight him again. Woo! It's basically the same as the first fight, except you win by kicking him in the crotch. And then Birdman just like vanishes. And then Dane goes downstairs and then runs into more gang members. And the fight appears to be in the same room as the beginning of the game, but like with a different camera angle. Even though like it looks like they were supposed to be in a different building or something? Question mark? In this brawl, however, Dane holds one of the gang members down and it looks like he's about to interrogate them or something. But then he just gets a random text message and then the police bust in. And then he just leaves. Okay. Police arrives, Detective Dad Robert shows up, and then runs into Dane and the two have a secret conversation, during which there's another inexplicable flashback of Kid Dane drawing the circle like it's the ring or something, and then the scene just ends. This is another one of those scenes that's supposed to be important, but even if you understand why it exists, and even with the sound on, the edited placement in the story is just... why? So cut back to a place that I think is supposed to be the Club Moonrise from before, where Dane receives and then blows off a phone call from someone named Tay. This is really silly to me, mostly because the guy who's calling Dane knows he's calling a deaf person. Though even though it does say face on, so I'm like assuming that he's gonna turn FaceTime on so they can have a conversation and, you know, lip read and stuff like that, but like, does texting not exist in this universe? Also, in the Quiet playthrough, this is the first time we ever learned Tay's name, so the appropriate reaction to seeing this call would be like, who? Anyways, in case you haven't guessed, Tay is this guy from before. Surprise. But more important matters, suddenly, Dane finds a box lying around which contains both the Birdman mask and the bloody dress of Piano Lady Mom Person. Dane silently chews the scenery for a little bit and then just like blacks out. When he comes to, we discovered that he had gone berserk and had beaten the crap out of all these guys, including Man Bun Guy, who for some reason was casually talking to Tay also on a FaceTime call. I guess this is just to frame his reaction and get the shot of Dane punching a phone. Speaking of phones, we suddenly get a video message by Birdman and surprise, Piano Lady Person is still alive and he sends out coordinates. We also blow off Tay a second time and then he gets mad in his limo. Yay. So we're on our way to confront Birdman, sorta. Dane just heads to the subway and beats up some random thugs. We fight in a parking garage and then we beat up more thugs. You knock over gasoline carried in a compressed air canister. Just wait for it. Enter up a building and beat up more guys, and eventually you make up your way to the top penthouse and you find a guy with a Birdman mask, and it's just some guy. A brief flashback is given to say that this guy is basically that other dude who shot Piano Mom in Dane's childhood, but like, not only do these models barely look alike, but because of the lack of audio, there's basically no context for this. Also, he just has a golden statue of himself in his apartment. But anyways, you have to fight him. He takes an inordinate amount of time to defeat, and he has 3 interrupting cutscenes. But when you finally do beat him, Dane does this amazing JoJo beatdown, where you then do this matrix window defenestration, complete with wobbly glass. Don't ask me. And then Dane jumps after him? I swear to God, I didn't edit any of that. That's how the entire scene is edited. Like, Piano Lady just appears, like, out of the aether. Anyway, Dane and Piano Lady escape because, there it is, the building is going up in flames. So Dane does this like Sonic 2006 bridal carry cutscene fight, and then they make it out. Scene fades out, and then the two are abruptly having some quiet, intimate conversation, which could provide some clarity if we could understand it. But even if it did, suddenly the two are attacked, and this time it's by Tay, and then he kicks the crap out of Dane. He's really mad that you didn't pick up on his phone call, Dane. Like, that isn't the actual reason, but, you know, it should be. So, like, Tay pulls a gun on Dane for some reason, but then, like, Piano Lady says something, and then they leave. But not before Dane gets punched in the face by Man Bun. So, fade to later, after your allies leave Dane unconscious to just lay there on the ground, I guess. He's then woken up by Detective Dad Robert. Yay, remember him? Flashback again, this time to where Dane is talking to Police Dad Robert. And then cut to Dane talking to like some therapist person. If you remember that one flashback to where Dane was being beat up as a child, yeah, this doesn't actually have anything to do with that. Although, make note of that. So Detective Dad Robert takes Dane out on a ride not to the police station, knowing that he's done a lot of criminal violence throughout the night, and he then drives you to the place where you're just sort of partners now, I guess. Kinda. On the way, you encounter some thugs, all of which are slightly different to your normal enemies in that they're wearing slightly different clothes. But what's really funny is that Dane is accompanying you throughout all this, and he just sort of vanishes every time you get into a fight. And then when it's over, he just reappears like nothing happened. Anyways, it turns out the building is actually Tay's club, and it's his men in suits that you've been beating up. Yeah, he actually has them, I guess. Then Tay shows up to talk for 2 minutes, and then he just leaves. And then he sends more guys to kick your ass. And then he comes back and talks for 3 minutes. And then he just leaves again so you can fight more thugs. Only this time you get to beat up Man Bun. Yay. Also, you defeat him by punching his punch. So after that cul-de-sac, you go upstairs, but then Robert Dad gets shot. Oh no, how tragic. Tay shows up again with a gun. A screen flashes showing young Tay holding a tiny gun, which kind of gives us this unintentionally funny implication that the gun somehow grew up with Tay. Anyways, Tay monologues for about 2 minutes, pulls the Birdman mask out of nowhere and gestures to it like it's important. Then he looks like he's about to shoot Dane? Dad? The camera angle doesn't make it clear. But then, whoa, Piano Lady out of nowhere. I have no idea where she was before this all happened, but whatever, took her long enough. She then runs up to the roof for some reason, with Tay chasing after her, just in time for one last flashback that shows the entire scene of young Dane's piano mom's death, where assembling it all together reveals Dane is waving hi to 2 guys fighting over a gun, and again, this was all over shoes. Also, like, Tay was the one who accidentally fired, but then for some reason, the other dude, aka the guy that we beat up and defenestrated earlier, just picks it up. So fade to sometime later when Dane and Robert just wake up. I don't know why they're still there and why Tay didn't just kill both of them if he was gonna do it anyway. Dane goes up to pursue, but then is briefly stopped by a wounded Robert dude to be like, here, take the Birdman mask. And then it's revealed that that creepy drawing young Dane was drawing at the therapist's office is, gasp, Birdman. Woohoo! This twist is actually legitimately very important, but even with the explanation, it makes no sense. But anyways, he gives Dane the mask, he takes it while Robert just dies, I guess, because, you know, shot. So, bye. But anyways, Dane becomes Birdman now, I guess, and then you return to fighting more thugs out of nowhere before Dane remembers, oh yeah, Piano Lady's in danger. And so you head to the roof, Tay's tying her to a pole for some reason. You engage him in combat, but like the first fight with Birdman, you once again actually have to win against him before you reach a scenario where Tay remembers, oh yeah, gun, and then aims at Piano Lady. But then, oh no, Dane gets shot trying to save her. And, okay, I'm not sure how to phrase this next part as being any less jarring and random than it is in the actual game, but cut to Dane suddenly having a 1.5 minute long conversation with Piano Lady at Club Moonrise again, completely silent. I have no idea when this specific conversation is happening, but it seems to indicate to us that indeed, Piano Lady and Piano Mom are two different people. Once again, this is important, but it makes no sense. And then we return back to the present situation where Dane has become a shadow demon. So, Dane comes back from the dead and gains supernatural powers because, yeah, and then kicks the crap out of more thugs and then beats Tay to death, with images flashing of Tay being a good person. And then what looks to be like a cathartic scream that you can't hear. Oh, and Detective Dad wakes up or something, I guess. So Piano Not Mom, somehow having freed herself from being tied up, I guess, comes in and comforts now normal Dane, kisses his head. Yeah, it's really weird, I know. But then, another shocking swerve. It turns out that Birdman was Robert all along. Yeah. Okay, this time actually knowing the explanation behind this actually kind of makes sense, but it's still supremely stupid. Anyways, the two fight because... They double knockout. Piano Lady, who's barefoot now for some reason, stares into your soul, and then finally, at long last, the ending. Roll credits. Ah, but wait, there's one last thing before we go. That taster for the Answer DLC that I mentioned earlier. So it rewinds the previous monologues within this film with the sound turned on, and I just called this a film, didn't I? Anyways, the big reveal is this.
Lala.
I can't sing anymore. No one hears me. I don't hear me anymore. I want to be taken away and just disappear. Please. Please take me away.
Okay. I'm going to kidnap you.
So not only was Detective Dad Robert the Birdman and a kidnapper, but the kidnapping was specifically requested as a setup by Layla. Yeah, I'm gonna start calling Piano Lady by her real name now, but I refuse to pronounce it as Lala because for a singer that's just it's kind of on the nose. Alright, that's the bulk of the story down. Let's take a quick break.
This video is brought to you by Large Sharks. If you're looking for a companion, a background cameo, or just an internet meme you can physically hug, look no further than Large Sharks.
So before we get to the second playthrough, let's digress and talk about the actual gameplay for a second. Although this is probably going to be kind of short. To me, in terms of things that are easiest to dislike about this game, the gameplay is pretty up there. Because The Quiet Man is less of a game and more like a movie with broken audio that periodically interrupts itself with beat-em-up sections. The fact they even bothered at all is almost to its detriment because the cutscenes are at least enjoyably bewildering, but then every once in a while it stops itself and it's like, oh yeah, I actually have to play this game. But yeah, the gameplay. The implication that I got from the promotional teasers and like the interviews and stuff was that the gameplay was gonna like, you know, do something with the lack of sound, or at least emphasize some degree of heaviness and impact to offset the lack of sensory input, or something.
Dane's inability to hear, first of all, forces the player into a completely different state of mind. We're so used to, if anything, sensory overload. Surround sound, and I'm listening for our people sneaking up behind me, all the things that I'm used to doing in a game. That's gone.
We wanted to have the character have a great combo system, but make it accessible. We wanted it to have a lot of moves, but not necessarily require a lot of memorization.
But no, it doesn't work. Which is especially painful because the fight choreographer from Yakuza was involved. I don't know what went wrong in the process that resulted in everything turning out jank, but yeah, It did. The combat is basically just a generic button mashing brawl fest. The animations don't sell any sort of weight or impact to them, and there's this really annoying sort of blurriness to the movement where Dane just instantly snaps onto enemies from huge distances to the point where the camera has trouble keeping track. Enemies teleport all over the place to coordinate with takedown animations, and sometimes they still end up out of position, and pretty much every enemy is identical, sans some occasionally holding weapons. And trying to prioritize them only highlights the almost non-existent targeting system. The environments are also virtually identical, including one case where they are literally identical. What really disappointed me is that after I finished the game, I actually found out there are actual environmental takedowns. I have never noticed them and have no idea how to trigger them, so yeah. Yeah, in case you haven't noticed, the game is really bad at communicating concepts. Like, there is technically a tutorial, and here it is, basically. Yeah. This neon lit design it's a unique approach to explaining combat, but the design is just way too unclear as to what it even means. And there's such a lack of overall proper input as to what you're actually doing and whether or not it's working that you're pretty much just gonna button mash your way through. When you get that Birdman mask on, you gain some new move animations, but they're all functionally identical and manage to just look ridiculous. This menu also fails to explain a bunch of other things that would have been really helpful in the first playthrough to know. For instance, there's this lens flare on the top right that's actually supposed to be your super meter, I think. Again, it's an interesting idea, but the game never makes it clear that it's even a gameplay thing, and it's impossible to recognize because so much stuff is already happening, made worse by how utterly inconsistent its purpose is. There's that boss fight with that random guy at that penthouse, whose name is Isaac, by the way, where at times he just becomes intangible for no reason. Like, I think the fight is intended to require you to dodge his attacks and then channel the super speed mode in order to attack, I think. Like, sometimes it feels like you need to dodge in order to progress, sort of, or maybe it's just a glitch, I think. Also, I just want to point out this rug appears to be an Unreal Engine stock asset. Yay. And just to make the fighting even more unpleasant, occasionally you get even more flashbacks superimposing the thing, usually following a cutscene where you already saw it and it wasn't horribly distracting. This adds basically nothing except clutter to an already annoying fight system. And if you die, you get this cutscene where Piano Mom just appears to make kissy faces of concern in your soul, like, every time you die. Like, I have no disrespect to the actress or anything, but I am at a loss for whoever thought this was going to be a good idea. But anyways, the deepest question that I have with this gameplay is fundamentally, why? Like, the original pitch for this game was that it's supposed to be a game without sound.
When Kensei originally pitched a soundless video game, which was the very first sort of iteration, this was just such a thrilling concept. To go, how can we really pull this off? Can you really do that?
So I'm wondering where during development it was decided that making it like an Arkham City style beat 'em up was the way to go. Like, yeah, I get it. The idea is that with the game being silent, it presents this new challenge of, like, you know, trying to adjust to combat without your senses or something like that. But not only is the execution seriously botched, like, even with the sound on version, the fighting is just as unresponsive and clunky. Wouldn't this concept of playing with a fundamental sense being stripped away probably work for something like, I don't know, a horror game or something like that? And the thing is that with the story, once you actually figure out what's happening, it actually kinda does lend itself well to being like a thriller, which could have taken advantage of quietness as like a suspenseful element, which, like, it doesn't, sadly. Oh, but speaking of which, the plot. So before we get to deciphering this mess, I want to touch upon what the plot is not about. Because again, the storytelling is a mess, and it's very easy to misread what's happening and then come to the wrong conclusions. The actual story doesn't make any sense either, but just for the sake of making this explanation a little less confusing so we're on the same track, I want to just clear up some things. Number one, Birdman is not a split personality of Dane. If you thought that those scenes where Birdman just randomly vanishes, or maybe the scene where Dane finds the mask and then freaks out because he realized, oh no, I'm the Birdman, you'd be wrong. I don't really have an explanation for why he vanishes or why he turns into a demon at the end. Well, I kind of do, but it's stupid. This isn't like a Tyler Durden situation here, even though that would be kind of cool. This masked kidnapper is always supposed to be Detective Dad Robert, and Dane, he's not doing some like extreme split personality thing here. 2, Piano Mom and Layla are supposed to be two different people. This isn't some weird reincarnation thing where it's like the ghost of Dane's dead mom or something has come back to haunt them or something like that. They're just two complete strangers who happen to look completely identical and are played by the same actress. It is never explained why they look identical, which is kind of a problem because them looking identical is a really big plot point, which we'll get into in a moment. It's just a massive coincidence that is almost never questioned and serves as like a big basis for the plot, which like, yeah, good job there, writers. And 3, and you're going to have to really trust me on this one, there are no supernatural elements in this story. Yes, I know there was that climactic battle where Dane becomes the shadow demon and gets powers or something, but like the burn mask isn't actually some weird bionicle situation where it gives the users powers. It's just a mask. Piano Mom and Layla being identical, they're identical by complete coincidence. The actual explanation for what's going on in the climax, it's still immensely dumb and nonsensical on its own, but if you want this game to make even remote sense, you kind of have to blot out the idea of there being anything supernatural in the story. Okay, with that out of the way, let's figure out what's going on here. So when we last left off, the twist was revealed that the inciting incident of the plot where Layla gets kidnapped by Birdman, it was all a setup staged by Layla, who called Detective Dad Robert requesting they set up the kidnapping. The game, shockingly, doesn't make this very clear, but essentially Layla is a singer who works at Club Moonside under Tay, presumably as part of him being some kind of gang leader, and she's exhausted by it and just wants to escape. That scene earlier where Birdman simply kidnapped her by picking her up, see, that wasn't incompetence, that was foreshadowing, which it still looks like incompetence, but okay. Okay, let's just agree for the sake of propelling drama and the story's flow that this is a reasonable motivation and that this fake kidnapping is Layla's only way out to get out of the situation. Okay, so far so straightforward. Now things get really dumb, which we'll start by talking about Robert. So Robert is a detective who Layla finds and he agrees to this plan of kidnapping her. So what's up with the Birdman getup? Well, basically because Robert is kind of a terrible person. Yeah, it's time to address one of these pins. I didn't actually write anything on this one. Okay, flashback to Dane's childhood. Two guys get into a stupid fight, Piano Mom gets tragically shot, and it's really traumatic for Dane. But Robert is also sad because of the loss of his wife, and so he blames and abuses his son for it. Yeah, but wait, it gets even worse. So remember that one flashback that showed Child Dane after Mom got shot and the police officer dad is talking to him, and then later the shown at some counselor or something? If you thought by the framing of those scenes that it signified that Robert is caring or at least consoling his son, here's what he's actually saying in those scenes.
All I wanted was a life with that woman. It's like you were born and the world just stopped.
And today the sun went out. Because of you. I will never forgive you for what you took away from me.
He needs an outlet for the pain, the guilt.
No. Why does he need an outlet for the pain? He deserves it. Every inch.
Father of the Year. Like seriously, the only reason that these scenes are framed in this way is to be intentionally misleading, but like in the worst way possible. Like I know the point of this answered playthrough, at least in theory, is that it's going to reveal twists about additional context given through sound, but this twist doesn't jive at all through the game's presentation. It's not organic revelation, it's just bad. But anyways, in that scene late in the game, it's revealed that Birdman, at least in identity, is a character created by Dane. As the therapist explains in that scene, young Dane basically feels guilty about his mom's death. So as a coping mechanism, he created the Quiet Man as basically a representation of all his trauma, like all his pain, all his guilt. But he also imagines it as like a hero, represented as Birdman.
Is it him again? Quiet Man? Yeah. He sounds very strong. He sounds like
So why is this relevant? Well, you see, as Robert explains in that one driving scene after you and Layla get intercepted by Tay,
Isaac might have been crazy, but at least he faced me when you tried to fuck me.
No, no! Tay.
Robert wants revenge on the guys who originally killed his wife. Tay, who grew up to be the gang leader of the club Moonside, who also happened to be friends and acquaintances with Dane, and this guy, who became the leader of a rival gang called Soul 33, members of which who are incidentally the enemies throughout most of the game. And if you're thinking this comes out of nowhere, did you remember that sign at the beginning of the game? You don't, because I showed it earlier in the first plot synopsis. And then during this, we get a sudden flashback scene to a kid crying over a dead body and a guy shouting at him with a gun, and then the flashback just ends. I know that shot seemed entirely inconsequential and forgettable. Now just imagine an entire game whose story is told in this way, where things are technically shown, but the associations are almost completely non-existent and without context. And it turns out this is the creator's vision of storytelling and foreshadowing for just about everything in this game. Ladies and gentlemen, the Quiet Man. But anyways, just to summarize, this is Robert's plan. Robert, just some random detective guy who's plotting revenge against two gang leaders, was hired by a random lady who, by complete coincidence, is a dead ringer to his dead wife and his son's dead mother. Then, by using this coincidental resemblance, her specific request to stage a kidnapping, and by using the image of the Quiet Man, including wearing this Birdman mask, he could indirectly manipulate his son by evoking his collective trauma into killing two gang leaders, one of which is the lover of who you're kidnapping and a longtime friend of your son, and another who's just some dude. And if you think that Superman leap of a missing steps plan is wild, just wait until you hear this. So the reason Isaac gets involved with this kidnapping subplot at all is basically because after kidnapping Layla, Robert lured Dane to Isaac's penthouse by sending a hostage video and the penthouse's location, making it look like so that Isaac was the Birdman kidnapper, but to goad Isaac into cooperating, he just dropped off a bird mask to do, I don't know. Like, this part of the plan counted on 1, Dane actually managing to fight through all of Isaac's gang before directly confronting him. 2, Dane being willing to actually kill Isaac for apparently being Birdman who kidnapped Layla, who is nowhere to be seen throughout this entire penthouse fight, so... And 3, for Isaac to play into being an asshole so that Dane can actually kill him, without Isaac ever questioning, what is this mask? Instead of questioning that, he then spouts really confusing boss banter.
You know that you deaf? But did you also know that you blind? Because if you weren't, you would have seen everything. I got stupid because I got caught up in somebody else's game. But after I'm through with you, somebody's gotta pay.
I get the feeling that Isaac, being an idiot who babbles nonsense and does really confusing things for no real reason, is supposed to be intentional to a degree, because back during the accident that killed Dane's mom, once again, it was originally all because of a pair of sneakers.
Give me the shoes or I'll shoot. Put the shoes down.
I got the cojones to use that.
And instead of dropping the damn things, he tackled Dane and wrestled for the gun, had Tay accidentally shoot Dane's mom, and then when he drops the gun and flees, Isaac not only picks up the gun, but then proceeds to taunt Dane, crying over his dead mom, until he's then arrested by police.
Pop up one, and I pop again. OG thug, homie, OG thug. Yeah. No, 33 for life.
I'm actually at a complete loss of what the hell this character is supposed to be. Meanwhile, on the Tay side of things, what Detective Dad Roberts planned to get Dane into killing him is basically randomly send Dane a package containing the Birdman mask and a bloody dress that Layla was wearing. This would then make Dane go out on a blackout rampage where he then beats the crap out of Tay's gang, basically his own side, causing a rift between them, which would then result in Dane killing Tay himself. This rift, by the way, is kind of dampened because after Dane and Layla escape Isaac's place, Layla fesses up that she was the one to fake the kidnapping, and then she gets taken back to the club Moonside, and then Dane and Robert team up and they go back to the club, and then when you meet Tay, he's actually very understanding and is completely willing to forgive Dane for his actions.
It's not your fault. I want you to know that. From the bottom of my heart, I believe you've been a pawn in someone else's game. And if you just stop. Just quit it. Right here and now, we can fix it. Look, we can fix this. We can talk it out. It can go back to the way it was.
And then Dane is like, no.
Let the girl go.
And then Tay is like, oh, okay, I guess I'll have to kill you and your dad, and then also Layla for some reason. So during this, after Robert gets shot, he basically gives Dane the Birdman mask because he's like, your imaginary Birdman thing is stupid, but like, be a superhero or something. So the implication is that Dane becoming this weird shadow monster is him indulging in an internal fantasy where it's like, this is how he sees himself in the world right now, except it's also real because how else would he have survived being shot in the head? But then when he's beating Tay up in FMV, he's totally normal and nobody questions anything about the demon form or him being shot or Robert being shot. And like, all of this was started because of sneakers? So just to be clear, Robert's insane plan not only worked, but the only reason it worked is because everybody involved is crazy, including his son, who kills his best friend because he wants to believe that this lady who looks like his mom is his mom, and so he wants to protect her.
You don't have to be the quiet man anymore.
I killed her. I killed her.
And yeah, that reminds me of pin 1. This pin. Yeah. So this whole kidnapping thing, this isn't actually the first time Dane and Layla have ever interacted before. There were 2 random scenes that it seriously wasn't clear they were supposed to be flashbacks on my first or even second viewings. But essentially the 2 had already formed a camaraderie before they had that weird hand-holdy limo drive. And even weirder is that Dane has already been like, hey, I want to believe that you're my mom, and I want to protect you because she died.
She died.
Tell me.
I wish you were her. I wish I could save you.
And then she's just smiling and is like, aw, that's charming, instead of, what? But just to cap this off, there's the ending, where Robert wakes up from his bullet wound. It's never explained. Not only revealing himself to have been Birdman all along, which in hindsight, given how Dane had already been led to believe Isaac was the kidnapper up until now, is kind of self-sabotaging and pointless reveal that only serves to screw Robert himself over. And then he's like, Layla is also my wife. See, I lost my wife and I want to protect her too. That means you must die. And then the 2 get into a really confusing fight where, hilariously, the 2 are somehow having a 2-way conversation, even with the mask, and the dialogue does not fit in with the conversation at all.
You know, I want to make up for what I did. I was a shitty husband and a worse father to you. But, damn it, I wanted to change. I want to change.
So the 2 fight, Robert sees his wife and is like, it's okay, honey, I guess. Then the double knockout, weird face cam, credits roll. But wait! Seriously, we're almost done. Last reveal. Just for one last kick in the face, there's actually a second ending. When you complete the second playthrough and after the credits, which I want to especially point out consists mostly of footage of young Dane and Robert being happy with Piano Mom, is then followed by a different stinger from what was shown earlier. This time it shows Dane leaving some kind of prison? I mean, I'm assuming this is a long time after the events of the game, but like, there's no explanation for how he got to be arrested or whatever happened to Layla, but you know, just whatever. But anyways, Dane finally gets to go, and then waiting outside the station, it's Robert. Yay.
We really gonna try for round 2? Old man?
I'm game if you are. Son.
So just to recap, because I cannot stress this enough, Robert is a father who abused his son and blamed him for the death of his wife, and the inciting plot for the game is how he made a plan to psychologically manipulate said son by evoking the trauma regarding his dead mom and his imaginary character made in association of his dead mom in order to lead him into a false flag operation that kills 2 gang leaders, one of which is his closest friend. Then, when he allegedly felt guilty about it, he decided to express his remorse by beating the crap out of his already battered, emotionally wary son, and not only does he get away with no apparent repercussions, the two decide to make up for some reason. Father of the Year. And this sounds really insane, because it is, but my best guess of why they decided to reconcile is because Dane straight up never realized that Robert was behind anything. Because in that drive scene where Robert is expositing his plan to get Dane to kill his friends, Dane's just looking the other way and not paying attention at all. And then Robert just keeps talking.
I could kill 2 assholes, 1 bullet. I'll give you a guess who the bullet is. Oh, and that girl. She told me you spilled your guts out to her.
I can only assume that Dane has canonically never learned about his dad being a manipulative asshole who orchestrated him murdering Tay, all for his personal vendetta. And considering that Robert's apology for all this is to beat the shit out of his son, I'm pretty sure he isn't gonna get over being one. But like, it's a happy ending! The traumatized son and his abusive father are having another go! Many thanks to this intentional, one-sided mental abuse and murder for rebuilding this relationship. Yeah, Robert is kind of the worst. You can make that the alternate subtitle for this game. So this might sound a little weird, but I'm about to get into my final really big criticism about this game, so I just want to take this moment to talk about the things that I actually like. This game is really bad, but personally, I don't feel comfortable claiming that it's all worthless.
When I was 15, I believe, I got sick. What I got was PlayStation there. That was like another world I can be, you know, that actually saved my life. I was in this room with like 5 other kids there. Actually, one of them, you know, couldn't, you know, speak. But, you know, you didn't need any words there, you know, we played together and get excited, and sometimes you don't need words, you know, to communicate, to be friends. That Quiet Man is, you know, communication beyond words, and I knew it for a long time ago.
Like I said, there was genuinely a lot of potential in this project. Based on everything I read, it feels like that the creative team was trying to make this work, and it really didn't work out, but like, points for trying, I guess? But anyways, stuff that I like, though you might have to look at these with like a few asterisks. First of all, the visuals. They're not the worst that I've ever seen. And I'm not talking about the actual fidelity of the game because, as you've probably noticed, the in-engine gameplay is really rough. The seamless transitions that were advertised between it and the FMV are really noticeable, and the animation is... yeah. But what I mean more is just that the general visual aesthetic and overall style of the game, it's pretty nice. It really feels like the cinematographer or visual designer, whoever it was, had a pretty solid vision for this David Fincher-inspired, like, modern crime noir aesthetic, and you could definitely recognize the dark thriller mood the game was trying to achieve, especially in FMVs.
I think one of the biggest challenges with the effects on this game was the level of fidelity that it had to match up with live action, the lighting, the amount of detail.
There's this one scene that I mentioned earlier, and it's the scene where Dane accompanies Layla for her piano performance. In a vacuum, it feels like the closest showcase of what the game's silent narrative wanted to be, because it comes so close to being a great display of subtle show-don't-tell storytelling. Just from the context alone, Dane simply being present at Layla's performance and seemingly enjoying it despite the fact he can't actually hear her, it does a good job suggesting there's already emotional investment between these two characters, and it raises some genuinely enticing questions about Dane and their relationship. Like, was Dane always unable to hear? Who exactly is this piano lady? We've seen some flashbacks of another piano lady. Did Dane at some point have hearing and was able to comprehend music but now isn't, but is both here for the performer as emotional support and to try and experience music for himself again? Of course, we now know the answer to some of these, and Yeah. Third, there's that scene where Tay intercepts Dane and Layla and they decide to knock Dane out, and then Man Bun Guy does this.
With the blood.
Alright, that's kind of funny. I like that joke, yeah. Fourth, I actually really like Tay's actor. So something that I mentioned earlier is that there's a certain verve required for silent acting, and most of the cast really fails to reach it, and it's why most of their interactions are so incomprehensible. Maybe it was just a lack of direction or clarity, I don't know, but Tay's actor, who's named John Anthony Williams, seems to be the only one who's realized that acting is 60 to 90% physical, and is probably making the best active attempt at acting more visually, and even his performance with the sound on, I don't think was that bad. It's a real pity that his model looks so terrible, and that his beard appears to be made of Vanta Black. Like, the script is bad, and the character turns into a weirdo by the end of the game, but like, it feels like he's trying his best with the material that he's given, and I believe that he believes in this character, conveying the authority and poise that Tay was envisioned with, and I think it works pretty nicely.
Why this? What the fuck is this?
He even does actual American Sign Language, sort of. We'll talk about that in a bit. But points were actually bothering and trying to introduce some substance into this void of a game. Like, I think he actually does more ASL for the deaf character than the actual deaf character. And lastly, the concept of the Quiet Man himself. Not exactly the game as a whole, sort of, but I'm more specifically talking about this Quiet Man, the character who Dane comes up with. So the idea of this concept is that he created it from when he was young as a representation of his pain and sorrow, but also as a source of potential heroism, one which gets unknowingly turned on him years later when he becomes a real tangible threat and forces him to confront his trauma. Jokes about edgy children and the horrible subtext of Dad's psychological and emotional abuse aside, the idea of being revisited by a literal personal demon that forces you to come to terms with your past, that sounds like a really cool idea. And if you're thinking that sounds even mildly familiar, that's because it's just Pyramid Head from Silent Hill. The Quiet Man would have seriously been so much better had it just been a ripoff of Silent Hill and went the psychological horror route. And I'm only slightly joking when I say that. No, really, like, a lot of concepts already present in this game feel like they'd be better suited for that sort of genre than just this random crime noir brawler it went with. Like, think about it, a game where you're deprived of sound. That concept alone sounds like it's excellent to bake into a tense survival horror experience, being a potentially interesting gameplay element, and also intentionally disorienting, but in a way that's not frustrating because you're asking, what is even going on, but more like, there's not a monster behind me, is there? Like, instead of just focusing on this, like, hard to interpret gang warfare stuff, why not specifically focus just on Dane rescuing someone who looks like his dead mom and is being kidnapped by this supernatural manifestation of his fears and pain, and eventually having to come directly face to face with it, both as a literal opponent of his pain and as a metaphor for getting over his trauma. Like, if you wanted to, and you were really clever about how you did it, like, you could even keep the twist about Dad being the psychological chess master of everything, and even the abuse angle too, you know? Like, maybe he was the one who literally summoned and conjured this Quiet Man demon to provoke his son. Hell, even the weird Freudian subtext of, like, this weird love interest that resembles your dead mom, that could be used to build up personal stakes and uncomfortable creep factor. Because the thing is that this weird incest stuff, it's not invalid as an idea for a story concept. It's just that the final product never addresses it as being weird and uncomfortable. It just thinks it's charming, I guess. I could go on, but like, I really wish that they had realized they had the perfect opportunity to do their own ripoff of Silent Hill. I mean, it's not like Konami's gonna do their own Silent Hill. May it rest in peace. But no, instead they decided to go this route of like convoluted revenge against gang leaders and weird incest and abuse that the game doesn't see as weird. A route of which that has basically nothing at all to do with communication beyond words, or even the fact that Dane is deaf, which is about as good a segue as any to bring us to my final point of this video. Alright, this is the heavy one. Alright, so I want to start by mentioning that not only has this game not been well received by anyone. It has especially not been well received by the deaf community, which is really unfortunate because when I saw this game first being announced, I saw a lot of people who were really in support of a game built around the experience of being a deaf protagonist, which really, that isn't a thing that's explored a lot in gaming, or really any media that I can think of. Like earlier in 2018, there was that VR game Moss, which had a playable character animated to do ASL, and that was a pretty good step. But a narrative being told specifically through the lens of a deaf person is something that could have been a very interesting and unique experience, as well as good for inclusivity of a group that really isn't represented a whole lot. But that's not the game we ended up getting, because not only is the story not even about Dane's deafness, or is even really that big a deal to the character, the implementation of handling deaf people is... It's got problems. For starters, the Quiet Man indulges in what I like to call gang sign language. Even though it's not as reliable as the game makes it out to be, for the sake of story convenience, I can buy that Dane, as a deaf person who is able to understand the world around him primarily through lip reading, and is even capable of having two-way spoken conversations with others, because that's a thing that happens in real life. But the game does use sign language, but basically only just whenever the writer thinks it looks cool, and even to characters who can't explicitly even understand sign language.
I don't sign, man.
Hell, even the developers specifically mentioned Dane. They wanted him to be able to express himself through sign language and gang signs.
It's really important to keep in mind that Dane is a character who cannot hear, but uses lip reading, some ASL, and some gang signs to communicate with those who are closest to him.
Which, like, no. Look, I know being a badass puncher guy is part of the character description, but like, if there's anything more the world doesn't need any more of, it's conflating negative stereotypes with a people that already doesn't have much of a voice, but already get screwed over by people who think that those two things are the same thing. Which begs the question, have these people even so much as met a deaf person? Like, they had one guy who was a consultant to make sure the sign language was correct, but he himself isn't actually deaf. And as far as I can tell, nobody who was involved in the game is actually hard of hearing. Like, not even credited consultants who were basically asked, hey, is this tasteful? Like, in your game that's like allegedly about a deaf protagonist and communicating beyond words, you'd think that they would, like, I don't know, cast an actual deaf actor, like maybe one who can actually sign. But the biggest sin against this game, and one that pretty much everyone who's talked about this game this last year has condemned it for, is what this experience itself directly implies. I already went into the failings of just the basic premise of the game and how a completely silent narrative both fails as an actual functional viewing experience and as an accurate depiction of the POV of our deaf protagonist. But what's really getting people upset is how, because of this incomprehensibility, it implies that deaf people are bumbling and entirely useless and are incapable of understanding or functioning in this world without the ability to hear. I'm a little of two ways about this. Like, on one hand, the fact the game was initially billed as being about comprehending the world through a deaf POV with an expectation that the narrative would be built around this idea, but then resulting in a completely inaccurate and incoherent mess that it turned out to be. Yeah, I totally understand why people are getting mad about it, especially deaf people. And yes, it is very irresponsible on the hand of the developers. But like, at that same token, I actually think that the fact the game isn't even really about Dane's deafness kind of makes things less discriminatory. Because that's the thing, this game really isn't about deafness, like, at all. As I mentioned, Dane is able to have regular two-way conversations with other people with lip reading, to a degree that I'm pretty sure is kind of impossible in real life, and he doesn't even have trouble understanding characters he isn't even looking at, or whose faces are covered, which I know is not possible. Like, add the fact that he articulates his word pretty well, it feels like Dane is someone who, I don't know, you'd sit down at a restaurant and you could have a long conversation with him, and you'd straight up never realize he was deaf unless he told it to you. Which, in a game that's allegedly about a deaf POV protagonist where conversations make a bulk of the storytelling cutscenes, that's just not a good look. Really, there isn't any reason at all for Dane to be deaf in this narrative. The fact that he is deaf is only brought up like a few token times.
I know it's ironic telling you this, but she hasn't sung for weeks.
Fucking stupid, crippled bastard! I can scream and you don't hear me!
No need to yell, Dane. I ain't the deaf one.
Why can't I hear? Why?
But like, it never really becomes an active hindrance for him as a character in terms of like absorbing the story or getting into the conflict. But it is what the developers think is a representation of deafness, and that is definitely a hindrance for us, the audience, which like, nice. Dane's deafness is ultimately such a non-issue that's divorced from the actual plot of the game that really, you could mute any script of any other game in any other genre, allege that the protagonist is deaf and you're experiencing what they're experiencing, and it would be just as worthwhile an explanation as in, like, not at all. Combined with the fact they actually felt the need to release a second playthrough just to get anyone to start comprehending anything, a process of which basically demolishes any intent that they might have had with the pitch in the first place, turns this game into the ultimate artistic failure.
We are not interested in vanilla. Some people are great at vanilla ice cream, and we don't want to make vanilla ice cream. It's not what we're interested in. This is a very unique flavor, and the people who want that flavor and who want to be challenged in an immersive experience, I think are going to find this game and really enjoy it.
For me, The Quiet Man aims to say more than what might be on the surface.
The Quiet Man, I would say it's a crazy game, crazy concept. It's a crazy, ambitious project to, even to start with, I believe in a video game changed me, and if one video game, can change people's mind, that means like, video game can, change the world.
All being played! Deaf and blind! Deaf and blind!
So that's The Quiet Man, or at least as much as I'm gonna get into, even though it's probably a little much. I really can't believe that I enjoy this disaster so much. I want to say it's like Tommy Wiseau's The Room in terms of its so bad it's good enjoyability factor, but it's kind of weird because The Room is immensely enjoyable in terms of just like something that you can actually directly view and experience for yourself, which The Quiet Man as a game is really not, unless you're maybe like watching a Let's Play of the sound on version. However, I feel that just the experience of like discovering what the hell this catastrophe is made of, and the sheer bottomless pit of failure it extends to, where things slowly fall into place and paradoxically get so much worse and so much funnier. It's just magical. And that's kind of the thing. For all of its shortcomings, I can't bring myself to really hate this, especially since for the time being, it appears to have just been like a genuine attempt at tackling this really ambitious concept, but was just completely screwballed. Not out of malice, just unbelievably high profile incompetence. I really hope that someone decides to give this concept of a video game built around a lack of sound the actual proper talent and vision that it deserves, because again, I think there's genuinely a lot of potential and worthwhile things that you can do with it in the hands of someone who actually knows what they're doing, especially since there's an audience who's yearning for a game like this that can not only exist, but be good. And if this game isn't gonna go down as like a room quality so bad it's good travesty, which it probably won't, then at the very least it could be used as setting an example for how not to execute this concept. So, like, if anyone wants to make that Silent Hill knockoff that I suggested earlier, feel free to use it for your game. It's not gonna be made, is it? I really want it so bad. Alright, and spoilers. That's pretty cool. I just got this new thing that's like Bluetooth to the, yeah.
Sorry, I had to take a quick leak. What'd I miss? Just read chat really quick. Yep, alright. There we go.